Hey crafters, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to use the Boblong Gel Press and some Distress Oxides to make a card. Hope you enjoy! So for this card I used the Lavinia Stamps Boblong Gel Press, which is 3.5 inches by 7 3/4 inches. Now I wanted there to be a little bit of a sparkle and shine in the background, so I started by putting on some watercolor paints. These are the Opal colors by Gansai Tambi. And I started with some gold and then added pink, blue, and a tiny little bit of green. And I just put them randomly over the background. By putting these watercolors on first, you get a very subtle shimmer, but I will show you how adding the watercolors afterwards makes a more dramatic effect. Now I'm just going to mist the watercolors gently and then stamp this onto a piece of paper. Now this paper is slightly larger than the gel press, but I will be trimming it down later on. So as you can see, the watercolors are very subtle on white paper, but they are dramatic enough that you can definitely see them. So now I'm just going to clean off my gel press, and I'm just using a baby wipe for this and a piece of scrap paper just to help clean off the gel plate. So I wanted to add some Distress Oxides to this, and I found that if I use a blending brush and then gently tap on the Distress Oxides, not only does it work well on the gel plate, but it also allows you to stamp over top of the oxides without getting that cloudy look that you normally get. Now I made a sort of arc with my saltwater taffy, and I just added the old paper and the pumice stone around this arc. And I think these colors go really well together, as you'll see shortly. Now once I'm happy with that, I'm going to lightly spritz over the Distress Oxides and then press this onto my paper, which is now dried with the watercolors on it. Now the trick is not to add too much water, but just enough to soften that Distress Oxide. So I'm going to gently remove the gel press, and you can see the gorgeous background with that sparkle coming through the Distress Oxides. Now I'll let this dry, and I'm going to add a second layer. So I'm going to use the same 3 Distress Oxide colors in roughly the same shape, and again gently tapping it onto my gel press. Now again I'm going to lightly mist over the entire gel plate and lift it up and press it down onto my dried paper. And this will help to darken the background and make it a bit more vibrant. And you can see that beautiful opal color coming through. Just gorgeous. If you want to see more of that opal paint, you can add it in the second layer rather than the base layer, and it gives you this more vibrant effect. So here's the first one I did, and the second one, which is a lot more vibrant. So I'm going to add some stamps to my background, and I want this fairy dust silhouette to be in the center. So I'm sort of eyeballing where that will fit, and then I can add in my flowers. And I'm going to use the silhouette foliage set, and I'm going to stamp this with some medieval blue, but I don't want the ink to be too dark on the background, so I'm just going to apply it to the top part and stamp it off and stamp the second generation stamp onto my background. And I'm going to repeat this across the card. Now I'm trying not to stamp too much of the grass because I plan to put some more flowers in the front, but this time I'm going to use the Warm Breeze, and again I'm going to use the second generation of these. Now this means that some of my flowers are floating at this point, but don't worry, I will draw in the rest of the stems and the stalks later on. So once I'm happy with my flowers, I'm going to add a little bit of that warm breeze around the bottom of the card, just to add some color behind the grass area. And then I can add in my silhouette fairy. This is the Fairy Dust Silhouette, and I use some Nocturne ink for this. And she looks so gorgeous just in the middle of all those flowers. So once I've finished that, I'm going to add the mini flutter stamp, the little butterfly, and I'm going to stamp this with the medieval blue, once on the right and once on the left. Now I'm also going to use some of the fairy charms, and I'm going to stamp them in both the medieval blue and the warm breeze, and I'm doing the same thing that I did with the flowers at the bottom of the card. I'm stamping off, so these are all second generation prints. So the colors on the top match the colors on the bottom of the card. And then I'm going to use that same medieval blue and just lightly add some color around the top right and the top left of the card. I don't want to cover up too much of the background because I want to see that gorgeous opal paint peeking through. And I just love how you can see that background, the contrast of the Distress Oxides and the opal paints. Now I'm going to use the medieval blue to create a mat for my sentiment as well as for the main card. So I'll trim this rectangle down to 2 1/4 inches by 3/4 of an inch. And my larger rectangle for the back of my card will be 7 3/4 by 3 3/4 inches. And I'm just gluing the mat onto the back of my card, and the main card I have trimmed down to 3.5 inches by 7.5 inches. Now I'm going to glue this whole thing onto my finished card, and my finished card size is 8 1/4 by 4 1/4 inches. And I used glue to secure these pieces because I have used watercolor paint as well as Distress Oxides. I wanted to make sure this remained completely straight and secure on my card base. So to color in the images on my card, I used various Stardust jelly pens for this. So I used the green and the gold on this butterfly here, and on the butterfly on the left I used the blue and the gold. I will zoom in the camera a little bit later so you can see the detail, but these Stardust pens are my favorite for adding accents to these gorgeous Lavinia stamps. I also love how this fairy has open wings so that you can color in her wings as well. And I wasn't sure what color to use for her wings, so I thought maybe an ombre effect would be interesting. So I used several different colors, and starting at the base of the fairy and gradually changed color as I went. Now there is a little bit of an ink smudge in between the top 2 wings and the bottom 2 wings, which I will fix later on in the video. So if that ever happens to you, you can easily fix it instead of just starting again. Now this fairy also has hair that's easy to color, so I'm going to use the same Stardust pens and color in her hair as well. And I've just blended these 2 colors together just to create a nice effect on the wings. Now to help the fairy stand out a little bit more on the card, I used a white gel pen just to highlight around her. And I also wanted the fairy charms at the top of the paper to look a little bit different. So instead of using the Stardust pens, I thought I would use the Moonlight pens, which you'll see shortly. Now these Moonlight pens give more of a glossy look to the fairy charms, and they take a little bit longer to dry as the ink is a little bit thicker. But they really are quite effective and look gorgeous in real life. So this is the purple Moonlight pen. And I'm also going to use the blue Moonlight pen for the other fairy charms. Just be careful if you're using these because they do take a little bit longer to dry. Now I've just zoomed in a little bit so you can see this in more detail. And I'm using the Stardust pens on the magic that the fairy is sprinkling on the ground there. And you can probably see that error, the smudge in between the wings, a little bit better. But as I said, I will fix that later on. Now I used the Moonlight pens in between the flowers, just adding some dots to add some texture to those flowers. And I used the same purple and blue colors for these. Then using one of the Stardust pens, this is the green one, I just added some more stalks and stems to those flowers. And then a little bit more of that Moonlight Jelly Roll pen on the blue flowers as well. So I stamped the Happy Birthday sentiment from the heartfelt verses from Lavinia Stamps and put that on the smaller rectangle from before. And I glued that on the bottom there. And to cover up that ink smudge in between the fairy's wings, I started by adding some white jelly pen, but that didn't seem to completely cover it. So I went back in with my yellow Stardust pen and just added some little bits of yellow around the wings. And I think this helped to distract from that ink smudge. And I just smudged the yellow with my finger to make it look like there was a little bit of magic coming from the fairy's wings. So the recipient will never know there was a smudge there. Now for the inside of the card, I used another one of the heartfelt verses sentiments, as well as the same silhouette foliage stamp and the mini flutter, and I stamped these three together with the Warm Breeze ink, and this says with love. And now you can see the finished card with the birthday wishes on the outside and with love on the inside. Thanks for watching, and I hope you found this video inspiring. If you haven't already, please subscribe so that you're notified whenever I post a new video. Have a crafty day!